Welcome to Opposition Territory here at the Philadelphia Sports Devil Podcast Show, the longest running weekly Philly sports podcast show in the world. Just about 13 years strong. Got a couple more weeks before we'll be celebrating that milestone here at the PST Podcast Show. Here on Opposition Territory this week, we're going to be diving into the Green Bay Packers, and we haven't talked about this team too much this offseason, and it's really been an interesting offseason for the Packers. And joining us from acmepackingcompany.com, we love our SB Nation sites, and the Frozen Tundra podcast, we've got our good friend, Evan Tex Western. Tex, buddy, it's good to see you. How you doing? I mean, I know you're a little under the weather, but how you doing otherwise?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. You're right. It has been a really interesting offseason for this team. And we'll get into it, but
Yeah,
it's kind of flown under the radar a little bit, but I think they've
it
made
has.
some moves that have been kind of exciting. And yeah, other than that, looking forward to heading into draft season here and seeing what happens now that we're kind of through that free agency wave.
Absolutely. We're going to get into the draft for sure, folks, a little bit later during our discussion here. But, as we've said, interesting offseason for the Packers. But before we get into the actual crux of what the team and the front office has actually done in terms of acquisitions, letting certain players go, I really wanted to talk about the vision. Tex, the vision of what the Packers front office is going to be, because we're going to end up circling around towards the end of our discussion with regard to the NFC North and how this vision may end up impacting how this division really looks, not just for the Packers, but from an overall perspective at the end of the day here. I mean, free agency can only give, I think, a glimpse of where teams want to actually go in the future. Plug in holes, adding depth here and there. Philadelphia Eagles certainly do that. A number of other teams throughout the league do that as well. How do you see the vision that the Packers are really trying to, forge ahead? And how do you see that vision taking shape here in the Packers front office?
Yeah, I feel like this offseason has really been about defining who the core of this team and this roster is going to be in the next couple of years. You saw, again, a lot of guys leave in free agency. And, with certain additions, the guys who've stayed, who are going to be up for contract extensions, you're talking about guys like Christian Watson and Tucker Kraft, these big playmakers on offense. And some of the guys that they look like they're ready to build around defensively, it does seem like they're really defining who those core guys are, who they really want to build around, and then trying to fit some pieces around those guys to flesh out the roster. And one of the things for them is that this offseason they did a lot in trying to get some flexibility with making sure they had a bunch of compensatory draft picks for the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Not jeopardizing those in terms of some of the departures. But this is a team where there's a lot of up and coming young players on this roster and guys that look like they're ready for bigger roles. And by some of the departures, they're freeing up playing time for some of these young players to start emerging in 2026. I really think 26 is going to be this team always wants to compete every single year. That's always been their mantra. They are not a tear it all down to the studs and rebuild from scratch. They've never been that way, going back to the start of the Ron Wolf days. So I feel like this is a get healthy season, right? You've got Kraft and Micah Parsons obviously coming off of ACL injuries. This is a get healthy off season. Get those guys back into the lineup, by early, a month or two into the season.
Yep.
Try to compete in 26, retool a little bit. But then this team is also going to have a lot of financial and draft flexibility, I think, in 27 and 28. And I think there's a chance you could see some real big investment in making a run in those next 2 years when they do have a lot of this financial flexibility that's going to come free. So that's sort of where I think the vision is for this team in the next couple of years. We saw the team re-up with Matt LaFleur for a long-term contract extension. The leadership clearly feels that he's the guy to take this team to a Super Bowl. And that's an important sign right there, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's also notable that basically to a man, every player who said anything publicly was effusive in his praise of Matt LaFleur and the coaching staff. So I think if they had made a change there, it would have been it would have been a shock to the locker room, and I think you're kind of restarting the clock a little bit on where this team is at. So, I think, yeah, the realistic term for this team, as it's more or less currently constructed, is the next 3 seasons, you could see this core of guys really, coming together and hopefully making a run at another title for this Packers team.
Yeah, and again, I think when you look at this division and how strong it is, and again, we're gonna get to this NFC North division when the last place team in the division from this past year was 9-8. I mean, that's it's a really strong division, and
Yeah.
any team within the NFC North has to have some sort of vision as to where their team is going to go in the future. As Tex is saying, looking 2-3 years down the road, that needs to happen specifically in a division like the NFC North. But I mean, it's also important to talk about too within the conversation here the departures from the Packers this offseason. Wide receiver Romeo Dobbs, he went to the Patriots. Quarterback Malik Willis, not necessarily the biggest contributor on the team, but he went to the Dolphins as well. He was a depth piece at the quarterback position. Sean Gary traded to the Dallas Cowboys. So I'm wondering, which of the players who are no longer with this team, Tex, kind of might concern you a little bit, or that you may have had a problem with. I mean, every team needs to let certain players go. I mean, I was very unhappy that the Philadelphia Eagles let Nakobe Dean go at the linebacker position. Really unhappy with how they let Reed Blankenship walk when I think they actually could have paid him considering the money he got down in Houston. That being said, were there any players that the team let go and didn't really try to pursue in free agency that maybe you had a little bit of a problem with? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, it's funny because I think everybody more or less expected the guys who left to leave,
Yeah. Okay.
one way or another. You kind of knew Willis was going to get starting quarterback money from somebody. That was pretty much a done
Yep.
deal. So, and again, if you're building up a backup quarterback into somebody who gets starting quarterback money, wish him well on his way and take
Yeah.
the compensatory draft pick you get for that big contract.
Right.
So
Right.
that one was a no-brainer. Dobbs is an interesting one because although he is a good and productive receiver, he's never really been a number one guy.
Right.
Even this last year, he led the Packers in all the receiving categories, but in the first half of the year, he was kind of the number two option behind Tucker Kraft. Then Kraft gets hurt and Christian Watson comes back basically the exact same week. And then Watson's the number one guy the whole rest of the way. So Dobbs has always been sort of a complementary piece in this passing game. And I think the Packers just kind of decided that, this isn't necessarily one of our core guys that we want to invest in,
Yeah.
especially knowing that he's going to get 17-18 million dollars a year on the open market. I think a lot of these guys, they had numbers on that they would be comfortable with, giving a guy X amount of money, but when that market goes above that for some of these players out on the broader free agent market, the Packers aren't going to overextend themselves, and that's been
Yeah.
something that they've demonstrated time and time again over the years.
The culture is there for that type of
Absolutely.
mentality. Yeah.
Correct. I honestly think quietly the guy that they re-signed that might have been one of the most impactful guys who was set to be a free agent is Sean Ryan. They re-signed him to come back and play center. We saw what happened to the center market this year when all of a sudden everybody's gone and
Yeah.
Tyler Linderbaum gets like $26 million a year
Yeah.
and blows the rest of the center market out of the water. And I thought that the Packers did a really good job by bringing Ryan back on a very team friendly and flexible deal, to give the team, they've got a guy in there who they think can do the job at least for the next season. Maybe they find a long-term center project in the draft or something that they can develop along with him, but they didn't give him a whole lot of guaranteed money. So they bought themselves the time that they needed to not go out and have to overpay in free agency for a center. I thought
Yeah.
that was a very shrewd move by Brian Gutekunst and company. Personally, if it were me, I would have loved to have seen them make a run at Tyler Biotish after Washington cut him, which I still don't understand what the heck the Commanders are thinking about that one.
I'm fine
Um,
with that.
yeah, for sure. But like they kind of signed for similar average numbers, I think around $10 million a year. I think Biotish
Yeah.
got more guaranteed, but he was a release, so he wouldn't have factored against the compensatory picks, which again was something the Packers factored in pretty heavily. But yeah, most of these guys are not surprising. Elton Jenkins was a no-brainer cut for this team. He got hurt, he wasn't playing well at center. And he had just a massive cap number in the last year of his deal. So
Yeah.
him being gone was no surprise. And honestly, with Rashawn Gary, the big surprise with him being traded is they got anything for him. I
Yeah.
think that was the big shocker for Packers fans is that, wait a minute, Jerry Jones is gonna give us a 4th round pick for Rashawn Gary? Sign us up. Like
Yeah.
that was a moment of celebration among Packers fans because there's only so many times that you can see him jog out a play and not get frustrated and be annoyed at the lack of effort. I ran some numbers the other day. Rashawn Gary has only played in 75% of the snaps in a single game in his Packers career about 5 times. He is not an every down
Really?
player. He has never been an every down player.
Okay.
Micah Parsons did that 9 games last year alone with the Packers. It's just the workload has always been confusing and frustrating with Gary. It's there's always been a conditioning thing. And frankly, most of his sacks last year, he had 7.5, but almost all of those were cleanup sacks on Parsons pressures.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're going from Gary down to Lucas Van Ness, who has been a good player, especially last year in some limited action. He's been a very good player. They've got Baron Sorrell, the 4th round pick last year, who started to turn it on and have some flashes at the end of last season. You did lose Kingsley Enagbare, who was sort of their edge 3 guy, to a 10-year or $10 million deal with the Jets, which was a great number for him as a guy who had been a spot starter and a rotational guy. So good for him for getting, a decent payday for next year. So you've got a little bit of depth questions there. I won't be surprised if they go to the edge group a little bit in the draft this spring.
Yeah.
But again, all of these guys that left, I think it was identifying players who they didn't think were going to be part of this core in these next couple of years that they had some level of internal replacements for, and that they felt like the numbers that these guys were going to be getting, either on the contracts that they were owed next year or that they would be getting in free agency, weren't numbers that they were comfortable paying. And so
Yeah.
now again, they've got flexibility now looking into 27. They've got the money to sign some of these core guys to big contract extensions and still invest in free agency next year when they're not going to have all of these departures, potentially giving them comp picks the following season that
Right.
they would need to offset.
Yeah.
So all of those things playing into it, but yeah, really, I think there's been a national narrative about this Packers team that they've lost so many key players and so many snaps on both sides of the ball in this offseason. And it's like, yeah, but you're also developing players behind them, and you've got guys that can finally kind of get entrenched in roles. Like we haven't talked about the left tackle position. Rasheed Walker is gone, which he misread his market, but that's a whole different story. But the Packers have had Jordan Morgan, who every time he's played left tackle, which is his natural position, he's played really, really well. They played him at guard the last couple of years a bunch. It hasn't gone great, but he's a left tackle. I'm convinced of that, and I think the
Yeah.
Packers are finally recognizing that he needs to be the left tackle, and he can be a plus pass protecting left tackle. So all these guys, there's development, and there are players ready to I think step into those roles that are vacated by these departures.
I'll tell you, I have no idea why these teams don't put us fans on the coaching staff half the time because we'd be able to make fantastic decisions all the time with our
Right?
teams, buddy. Yes, exactly. Look, folks, we're going to take a break. When we get back, we're going to talk about acquisitions because the Packers didn't only lose some players, they gained some talent as well. It's an important part of their upcoming season. So let's take that break real quick. We'll be back in just a bit. All right, we are back with our good friend Evan Tex Western from acmepackingcompany.com and Frozen Tundra podcast. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I believe you're on YouTube as well, right, my friend?
We're getting there. We're getting there. One of our pods in the feed is doing a YouTube show, a live show for the draft prep too. So
Okay, cool.
Yeah, definitely check those guys out too.
Awesome. All right. Well, we got into the losses and the departures during this offseason for the Packers. Let's get into some of the acquisitions here because we know that linebacker Zaire Franklin is coming on board here. Defensive tackle who us Eagles fans know, Javon Hargrave going to the Packers. Wide receiver and punt returner Sky Moore, he is now a Packer. A cornerback Benjamin St. Juste, he is a Packer now. That's just to name a few. How do you think the front office, Tex, handled the player acquisition process this offseason? And which newly acquired players are you really excited about seeing this coming season?
Well, yeah, I think the big thing here again is I keep coming back to these comp picks, right? The Packers
Yeah,
don't have a first round pick in 2027 because of the Micah Parsons trade. And suddenly they've probably, in all likelihood, based on this free agency period, they've added likely a third round pick, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth for the compensatory
it's
picks.
huge. It's huge.
Plus that
Yeah.
extra fourth rounder they got for Rashawn Gary in the trade with Dallas. So
Yep.
they've added a ton of flexibility. And I think one of the keys for them was not jeopardizing those comp picks for a player that they weren't really sold on being a member of this core.
Right.
So what do? They went out, they kind of they worked around the margins a little bit, and then they found a couple of guys who were cast-offs, who were roster cuts from other teams. And Javon Hargrave is the big one, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned it, right? Hargrave had his best years work playing for who? Jonathan Gannon in
Yep.
Philadelphia. And I think everybody's really excited to see what those two guys can do together again. And Gannon certainly got the most out of Hargrave on those Eagles defenses. So it felt like everybody was just waiting for the Vikings to cut him.
Yes.
And because it just felt like it was such an obvious fit with the Packers um that nobody was surprised when literally an hour after the transaction wire came down that Hargrave was released, he was already reportedly signing with Green Bay.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, the fit's going to be great. I think the more we learn about Gannon, the more we know he's going to run more of a 3-4, and I think that plays well to Hargrave probably playing more of like the 3 or 5 tech and
Yeah.
being able to be a penetrating pass rushing tackle, which really plays to his strengths. So I'm excited to see what he brings. I'm really excited about that. I think the other piece is they've found some guys to fill in on special teams, which they haven't really invested in special teams players in a dedicated way over the last several years. And I still wonder if that played into the whole thing with Rich Bisaccia abruptly leaving at the end of January and kind of leaving Green Bay without really much warning. So St. Juste, I think, he played a ton of special team snaps last year with the Chargers. But I also think he was also a very good zone corner. And I think that's going to play well in Gannon's scheme. I think you could see him being a potential rotational guy on the boundary. And, you might see him playing, 300, 400 defensive snaps and also being a core gunner and a core member of the Packers special teams units.
He was
And
not a
Sky
bad
Moore.
corner. He was not a bad
Yeah.
corner playing for the Commanders, I'll tell you that. Seriously,
Yeah.
there were times when he gave Eagles wide receivers some issues.
Yeah, he's tall, he's long, he's got
Yeah.
pretty decent speed. And like I said, last year he played great as a primary zone guy with
Yeah.
with the Chargers, and I think that could play really well with within Gannon's scheme. So I think they got him 2 years, 5 mil per. That's for a guy who you're counting on to be a core special teamer and potentially a good spot starter and reserve rotational guy. That's great.
Yeah.
Perfectly happy with that. Sky Moore is an interesting one because the Packers definitely have not had a punt returner that they can rely on for years. It's been, some combination of Romeo Dobbs and Jaden Reed and Keyshawn Nixon and Moore has the juice. So that's an area where I'm looking forward to seeing, maybe they really have decided that we do need to invest in some players on special
I
teams.
feel you. The Eagles are the same way. There's a
Boy,
lot of NFL teams that have really
yeah,
pulled away from special teams over the years just because they want to invest in other areas of their specific teams.
definitely. So yeah, I think the key there is again they found places where they can upgrade without really jeopardizing those high level compensatory picks.
Yeah.
And again, they did a good job of identifying areas of need. And again, that special teams investment, I do think is something that's been missing from Green Bay for some time. And I'm hoping, hopefully it pays some dividends this year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see for sure. And look, I mean, no team out there in the NFL is perfect. I mean, no team is. We never in a million years thought that the Seattle Seahawks would be Super Bowl champions, and they're certainly not a perfect team. I mean, a lot of things went right for them. The New England Patriots having one of the weakest schedules in the NFL certainly was a help to them throughout the season and just in terms of building their confidence and even developing their players. But again, no team is perfect, and you try to plug holes again, like I mentioned earlier, plug holes during free agency and during the off season. every team has these needs and they always want depth. But I'm wondering, what do you see with the Packers, Tex, as being the biggest unknown really heading into this 2026 season for this team and organization?
Yeah, I think it's clearly a run stuffing nose tackle. That's the guy, again, with that move back to more of a 3-4, those base downs you're going to be in a three-man front, and having that guy who can two gap and plug the middle against the run is
Yeah.
going to be important. And that's not necessarily going to be, he's not going to be a three down player, but that's somebody that the Packers don't really have on this roster right now. So that's an area where, we're really looking through this draft class and trying to find guys that can do that in kind of the middle rounds. And somebody like Dominique Orange out of Iowa State is a guy that we really like. Daryl Jackson out of Florida State might be a candidate for that too. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go to that well sometime in those, like I said, third, fourth round, and try to find a run stuffing nose tackle. I could also see, I mentioned center as a potential spot, really center anywhere along the interior of the offensive line.
Yeah.
Looking for guys to be able to have a little bit of versatility in there, but Aaron Banks came in last year. He had some injury issues, was in and out of the lineup a little bit. We'll see where Ryan goes if he develops as a starter at the center position. But I could certainly see them investing in that area for depth and then for future development. And then linebacker is a big question for me too. Edgerrin Cooper looks like one of those core guys at one
Yeah.
of those
Yeah.
positions. You mentioned Zaire Franklin coming in from Indy earlier. Again, that was a trade, so that was an acquisition that didn't cost anything in terms of the comp picks. We'll see where he ends up, because I think there's a little bit of a concern that his play dipped a little bit last season. So he'll be kind of probably competing with Isaiah McDuffie for the Mike linebacker spot. But that's certainly a position where, with Quay Walker leaving in free agency as well, you can see some investment. And then finally, corner. I think this team needs an infusion of talent at corner, and they've got their boundary guys are, I think, all up for pretty much all up at the end of this season. So certainly corner, D tackle, and like interior offensive line are definitely the focus areas in my mind for where this team is probably going to look to continue to build, whether that's through some potential free agent acquisitions that are on some guys that are still out there. Like
Yeah.
I think DJ Reader, I think, is still out there
I think he
as a
is. Yep.
nose tackle.
Yep.
So that could be one where I could see the Packers interested in him if they don't find that nose tackle that they like in the draft this year.
Yeah, look, the offseason certainly isn't over at all. Whether it's your team with the Packers, tons of other teams, Eagles, there's always the waiting game with some talent that's out there. Even during training camp, we see acquisitions happen. But I am going to really quick. I'm going to take one more break here, and then when we get back, let's talk some draft. NFL draft is right around the corner. What might the Packers do then? And we'll also get into the NFC North. Folks, stick with us. We are going to be back in just a bit. All right, we're back with our good friend Tex Western from acmepackingcompany.com, the Frozen Tundra podcast as well. And let's get into some draft talk here. It's one of my favorite times during the year with
Same.
regard to the NFL.
Yep.
I mean, it is. I mean, you got the regular season, you got the playoffs. Yes, it's fun to watch the game, but man, the strategy, the team building, how it all comes together or falls apart, quite frankly, for certain teams is always so interesting. And I mean, the Packers are known to build very young teams through the draft, very much like the Eagles. I think there's so much of our teams that are similar in so many ways anymore these days here in 2026. It's pretty astonishing. How do you see, Tex, the Packers and the front office approaching this draft, and what really needs to be prioritized for the future? I know before the break you mentioned few positions, whether it's cornerback, interior of the offensive line, that may need to be addressed in some way, shape, or form. But how do you really see this draft taking shape for the Packers?
Well, I mean, the first part of it, right, is that they don't have a first round pick as a result of the Micah Parsons trade.
Yeah.
So that's the big thing, is you're not going to see the Packers showing up on all your one round mock drafts
Yeah.
that are coming out here. But I think this is a year where this team is looking for depth, and it's looking for long term contributors. And I do think there's a level of the Packers are always sort of the best value available type of a team, where they're not going to get too hung up on positional needs and positional positional uh, the roster needs and things. They
Yeah.
always sort of look at that a couple years out. And I actually think that one position that's a little bit sneaky is wide receiver. Now they've got a lot of guys that are on that roster. You've got still Christian Watson, Matthew Golden, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks. But as of right now, Golden's the only guy who's under contract beyond 2026.
Yeah.
Now, certainly think Watson is going to get an extension during the season. He's not going to end up hitting free agency. So I think he'll be around for a long time. But um, this team could definitely use some depth, and again some long term potential contributors. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a wide receiver go in the mid rounds, and I kind of alluded to it earlier too. An edge rusher is a little bit of a quiet need from a depth perspective, because you're still kind of unsure what is this team going to do with Lucas Van Ness. Are they going to give him a fifth-year option? Are they going to try to extend his contract? Is he one of those core players on
Yeah.
this roster, or do they look to the draft to shore up that position as well? So I think that's going to be the really interesting thing. Is I don't expect that anybody that they draft, short of maybe if they end up with one of those big nose tackles, right, who plays, on first and second down and then is clearing off the field.
Yeah.
I don't expect a lot of snaps out of this rookie class one way or another in 2026. I do expect that this players that are drafted in this class are probably going to play a decent amount in 27 and then beyond. And I think that lines up with how this team's philosophy, has always been for years and years and years. You see this team always draft a year or two ahead in terms of need, or at least identifying areas where where the value of premier positions and things is very important. So that's sort of the approach that I expect to see this team take. And honestly, it's really, the Packers are kind of boring. They always do this. They so rarely take the flashy player, and that's honestly, it's kind of one of the reasons last year in Green Bay for the draft was so crazy, was to see them actually take the wide receiver in round one.
Right.
Um, but at the same time, I mean, you saw in that instance, right? The same sort of thing. Dobbs is a free agent this offseason. Some of those other guys are free agents next season. And so they were looking ahead a couple years down the line with that pick.
Yeah.
I think they're going to be content if they don't get a bunch of production out of these guys in year one. But that development, this team has always counted on that year two, year three impact from those rookie players. And again, that lines up, I think, with the timeline that this team really has.
Yeah. Well, let's close out our discussion here, Tex, with the divisional talk that I've been basically teasing this whole time. When we look at what the NFC North landscape is going to end up being. Again, when you had the Detroit Lions, who many of us thought were going to be a quote contender this past year, when they finished last in the division at 9-8, it's such an incredibly strong division. So this is how I see this division as we're heading into this 2026 season here. I mean, the Lions, they have the talent, I believe, to contend. The Vikings, they're in that certainly a transitional based type of phase right now. The Bears, they, I believe, are in an upward based trajectory. Where do you see the Packers fitting into this divisional equation here?
Yeah, like I sort of said, 26 is going to be interesting. It's almost a little bit of that bridge year, and it's going to depend, I think, very heavily on how healthy this team manages to stay, as well as how some of those key players end up bouncing back from injuries.
Yeah.
If it takes Micah Parsons and Tucker Kraft a little bit of time to really settle back in, it could be a little bit of a rough stretch in the first half of this season. So I'm trying to keep my expectations tempered a little bit for 26, with a really keen eye on 27. But that said, there's so much talent on this team. I think there's certainly plenty of talent to continue competing for a division title
Yeah.
and beyond. And so if you're asking me to handicap, where they're going to finish in the division, that's so tough because of what you just mentioned, right? All four of those
Yeah, not
teams
necessarily.
it's such a
Yeah.
crapshoot, right?
It really is because, I
Yeah.
mean, I can honestly see the Lions either being middle of the pack or, quite frankly, towards the top of the pack. Maybe the Bears take a step back, having some sort of slump. based on, just where expectations were
Yeah.
initially for them and where their fan base wants them to be. I don't necessarily know that they're as talented as maybe where they got to last year, quite frankly, but I always see the Packers being that team that will be able to contend year after year because you have a head coach who I think has grown tremendously during his tenure as the Packers head coach with Matt LaFleur, and I see a front office that's patient. And
Yes.
I think when you have a front office that's patient and laying that foundation, you're gonna remain a contender year after year. And I think that's what the Packers have.
I think that's exactly right. You did hit on something that I was going to get to is I do
Oh,
think the Bears overperformed
yeah,
last year. I think
yeah,
that's I feel very very strongly about that, and I do expect a little bit of the high variance Caleb Williams end of game stuff to come down to
right,
earth a little bit.
right,
God, I hope so.
yes,
But but then I could see, I mean, the Lions were just hammered by injuries again last
yeah,
year. And if that balances itself out a little bit more, if they're a little more league average in terms of their injuries, especially on defense, I mean, they could be bumping back up towards the top of the division too. But you nailed it with the Packers, right? This team benefits from having the ownership structure that it has. It's got a board of directors and a president, de facto owner who we're still learning about Ed Policy, the new guy.
yeah,
Mark Murphy
yeah,
retiring in this summer, but you could tell that when Policy re-upped with Matt LaFleur, that this wasn't somebody who was going to be as reactionary as some of these individual owners tend to be around
right,
the
right,
NFL. And so there's that level of patience where as a GM or as a member of the front office that you don't have to necessarily always be looking out for for what is the immediate impact on my owner's morale
right,
to make sure that I'm keeping the owner happy. It is, like you said, it is all about maintaining a sustained level of success. And when you do that, you always put yourself in a position to compete for a Super Bowl every single year.
yeah,
And again, that's always where the Packers are, and that's always going to keep them in contention for the division title, for playoff spots, and to hopefully get to a Super Bowl here
yeah.
again, because it's been a little bit for us. We're getting a little antsy here. It's been 16 years since Super
Yeah.
Bowl 45, so we're ready to get back there, and yeah, hopefully the next couple of years is when it happens for us.
I believe it's a possibility. I mean, on this podcast, I can't tell you when we do our NFL Eagles, preseason predictions or season predictions, I should say, Packers are always towards the top with my co-hosts and myself, whether it's going to the NFC Championship game. Over the past few years, we thought the Packers were going to be Super Bowl teams in terms of our predictions. So we'll have to wait and see. It's going to be an interesting offseason for the remainder of these next few months until training camp starts. And again, folks, he is Evan Tex Western from acmepackingcompany.com over at SB Nation. Check out Frozen Tundra podcast as well. Let folks know where they can connect with you on the interwebs out there if they want to, Tex.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot. You can find me. I'm active on Blue Sky at Tex Western. You can find us. We're acmepackingcompany.com, all spelled out, but on social media, we're at Acme Packing Co. And then, yeah, Frozen Tundra Frequencies podcast. It's at Frozen Tundra Pod on all of the various social media sites. And like you said, anywhere you get your podcast, look up Frozen Tundra Frequencies. And right now, we're doing a great session on the draft. We got my colleagues Tyler Brook and Justice Mosqueda break down position by position. We should have an episode coming up on the edge class
Nice.
this week. So that one's going to be a long one. I think they're going to be talking about probably 15 or 20 guys.
Yeah.
So get your but it's great stuff. I mean, they do an awesome job, both film junkies, and I respect the hell out of
Yeah.
both of those guys in terms of evaluating players and things. So
We're in that season
definitely
right
give
now,
them a
dude.
look.
Yeah,
We are.
absolutely.
We're
We're
right
in
in the
that
middle of it.
season right now. I can't
I
wait.
love it. Yep.
I know.
I
Can't
love it.
wait.
I was thinking I might make it over to Pittsburgh this year for the draft. It's not going to work out, but certainly, going to be a fun one, as it always is, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, and just to let our listeners know, we're going to have a lot more draft talk coming your way over the course of these next few weeks here. In fact, we're going to have one of our good buddies, comes on a couple times a year, one of the best in the business, Matt Waldman from the rookie scouting portfolio is going to be joining us. We're going to dive into a bunch of skill players. That's going to be coming up in your podcast feed in the very near future. So that being said, buddy, I have absolutely loved talking to you. You know that. Come back, join us. Let's talk more Packers, more NFL football down the road. Let's do it.
You say the word, I'll be here, man. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. Go Pack, go.